Hello and welcome to Vote 2 with me, Henry Bonsu. Now, with just days to go before the climax of the British general election campaign, we're tackling the big issues, the big questions the mainstream media find too hot to handle. Vote 2 is live at 6:30 every day until this Sunday. And wherever you're from, we invite you to put your election questions to our specialist panel. With us today are Dr. Wafiq Mustafa, chair of the Conservative Arab Network, Fiaz Mughal, who advises the Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg on interfaith issues, and we're waiting for the Labour parliamentary candidate Jeremy Corbyn, who should be with us any moment. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, if you want to ask them anything, call us now on +44 208 601 4555, or send us a text on +44 780 000 8066. If you prefer to send us an email, then you can do that too. The address is vote2@presstv.co.uk. You can see the numbers on the top right of your screen now. Well, all this week we've been talking to members of the great British public about the issues that really matter. And here's the first question for today.
I'd like to know where the parties stand on anti-terror legislation, specifically about the 28 days without trial.
So let's start with you, Wafiq, that first question. Where does the Conservative Party stand on the anti-terrorist legislation, specifically 28 days detention without trial? Habeas corpus goes back to 1215, the Magna Carta.
Well, actually, the Conservative Party stood against the 28 days detention without trial.
Mm-hmm. And on what principle, on what basis?
David Davis took this issue to heart, as everybody know, and they have recontested his seat to show how passionate he is about the need not to implement such.
And that's what the parliamentary party thought.
Yes.
What about the country at large? Because a lot of conservatively minded people are very concerned about law and order and very, very worried about terrorism, especially from outside the country, coming into Britain.
Of course, everybody worried about terrorism. Voting Conservative or Labour or Lib Dem, that has nothing to do with that. The fact of the matter is there's no need for 28 days, and the number of people and the modern technology in investigating terror cases is so much improved.
Well, Fiaz, that was a very passionate debate in Parliament and around the country a couple of years ago when this legislation was passed. What did the Lib Dems do? Where do they stand now?
We voted let's get this clear first of all of the Lib Dem MPs voted against the extension from effectively what was then at that point 28 days to what was around, I think, the 48 day
the government was trying to push 42 days.
Correct, 42 days. So we all voted against the extension. Let me be clear, we all voted against it. That meant that some of the Conservatives voted for it and a lot of Labour Party members voted for it. So the reality is the only party that was consistent in its message to stand against the extension was the Liberal Democrats. What do we believe now? We believe if you have somebody who effectively shows signs who has or wants to conduct terrorist incident should go through the court system. That is the way you take things. You take them through the court system, you don't hold them indefinitely without trial, effectively de facto in detention. That is not the part of the laws of our country. It is not part of what we have stood for. We say very clearly, if you have an issue, use intercepts of telephone intercepts, use other mechanisms to put people effectively through the judicial process. Don't leave them in limbo.
Wafiq, Fiaz saying his party was more principled than yours because some of your Tory MPs voted for this legislation, for the extension.
Well, that's untrue, actually.
But it's true, isn't it?
No, not true. I tell
Only
you
the Lib Dems voted as a party against it.
Why I would explain that the Conservative Party is much bigger number of MPs and a broader church than the Lib Dems. And I would say there will be certain variation in numbers, and that's quite healthy in democracy. And I concede that all the Conservative Party members of Parliament will vote for a single issue, but nonetheless, the Conservative Party opposed such legislation.
Okay, gentlemen, for the moment, thank you very much. We have lots of people calling in this evening. Let's see who we have on the line. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, hi.
What would you like to say?
Hello, yeah. I'd just like to ask the panel. Earlier this year, Alistair Darling imposed a one-off windfall tax on the bankers' bonuses. I'd like to know if the panel would support making this tax permanent, and if not, why not?
One-off windfall tax on bankers' bonuses. Fiaz, do the Lib Dems support that?
We support going further. The fact of the matter is that the banks, and particularly certain individuals leading the banks, have run the banks into the ground, which has meant that the government and the country has effectively had to bail out poor management and mismanagement of the banks. We go further. Apart from effectively holding the banks to account and making them more transparent, yes, they should be more accountable and pay more taxes, effectively put more money back into the system. But one very important point here is that we have invested as a country heavily by our monies going in to support the banks. There has to be a point where the banks literally repay that money back to our society, pay it back to our pockets. The reality is that time has to happen soon. The reality is the banks have to realise their lending procedures were completely out of order. They were lending to people who...
But they were lending to British businesses and to people who wanted that money to build, to create wealth, to buy houses, to run businesses.
Who couldn't effectively finance those positions. So they were providing lending up to 90, even 95% of mortgages, which with individuals who had little deposit to put down, effectively were mortgaging themselves to the hill. So there was free and easy lending taking place. Very clearly, Vince Cable had said many years before, look, the bubble is going to burst. We have a problem with lending. The banks knew it. The banks continued with it. And then we had the problem in the US, and our system effectively came to a halt.
Wafik, what about that windfall tax on the banks who have taken so much taxpayers' money in order to bail themselves out and then, of course, generate more bonuses for them? They really are unpopular in this country. But what about the Conservatives? Because you have always been seen as the friend of the banker, the friend of private enterprise, the friend of capitalism here in this country. And look what's happened with very, very little regulation.
I think it's very important to keep the banks under check, keep them regulated. Banks are a very important component of the British economy, and that's the bottom line. Of course, this huge bonuses is really an acceptable face of capitalism.
Well, you used to think that they were.
We do think, and we are not happy about it.
So, okay, you've changed your position. Let's see what